Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. Aloha. This week I took Ameritocracy on the road again to Hawaii on the island of Oahu to meet with Rear Admiral Michael Day, the U.S. Coast Guard District 14 commander and 9/11 hero that led the evacuation of over 400,000 people from the Manhattan Island after the chaos and tragedy of 9/11. I had the privilege of meeting with Admiral Day at the U.S. Coast Guard District 14 headquarters in Honolulu, overlooking Pearl Harbor. The Coast Guard is broken up operationally into 9 districts. The 14th district is located in the Pacific area and is responsible for the Hawaiian Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and activities in Saipan, Singapore, and Japan. We discussed his career, district responsibilities, and the preparation needed during career-defining assignments and moments. His testimony shows the value of working in a world-class organization like the U.S. Coast Guard that grows and trusts leaders to take charge and responsibility while providing a great perspective into leadership. This episode was recorded 1 week before the unfortunate Maui wildfire tragedy. I send my prayers and condolences to the people of Maui. I also encourage anyone interested in supporting those affected by the disaster to donate to the American Red Cross at redcross.org. Mahalo, and I hope you enjoy. Admiral Day, very nice to see you.
Well, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me up here as a guest here at District 14 headquarters. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, hey, any opportunity to talk about the Coast Guard, I'll take.
Yeah, you know, I had the privilege of working with the Coast Guard for a couple years up through 2021, and you know, as the Chief Financial Officer for DHS, and really started to get a super good impression and feeling of working with the Coast Guard, what it's about, the level and quality of the people in that job. You know, a lot of interaction between the Commandant and the CFO, who was my peer that I would work with a lot there. And from that process, I think the Commandant early on said, hey, Troy, there was 2 things that I wanted you to focus on: operational readiness and trying to secure a larger budget with the Coast Guard being reporting into DHS versus Department of Defense. You know, he was really focused on trying to build up the readiness and specifically the financial part of that to make it ready. And the second was very active on the offshore patrol cutter program that was commissioned and kind of off to a bit of a rocky start. And through that process, built a great relationship with the Coast Guard, and had an opportunity many times to go to some of the different districts and operations, everything from, you know, down at Key West and Miami to Charleston and East Coast, San Diego sector. It just really gave me kind of a really good appreciation for really what how the Coast Guard operates. And you know, what I was super excited today, what I wanted to talk to you about was get an opportunity to give the listeners an idea of, one, a little bit about yourself as the Admiral commanding the 14th District, and kind of a little bit of the structure and organization of how the Coast Guard kind of breaks down and divides to be able to provide for the mission. And also, something that was always very interesting to me was your role in the 9/11 in a historic event in the Coast Guard, and we'll talk about this a little bit. You know, there's a few of those career-defining moments that happen. I'm not sure, you know, at the time if you looked at it like that, but it's something that, you know, many people I know, when I even first heard your name, you were the 9/11 guy. Yeah. So yeah, that was exciting. And then maybe just to kind of finish for one of the objectives today would be as a previous mayor of a city in California, I had a military operation in my city at a base. So I had a lot of interaction with representing the community with the military and vice versa. And in California, as you know, there was a lot of activity around BRAC closure, and it was very important to keep a relationship where the community stayed supportive of the base. So being able to have the opportunity of doing that, I thought it might be interesting to get your perspective of you have a much larger area of responsibility than just where we're at here in Hawaii and Honolulu. But we can maybe talk a little bit about that. I would like to start, if you wouldn't mind, Admiral Day, just the bigger picture, maybe your journey into the Coast Guard and kind of take us up to your District 14 command, just to give everybody kind of a big picture view.
Sure, yeah. It's a little bit of a circuitous route, but so I was the son of a Navy chief, and at 17, I actually enlisted in the Navy for a few years. I was enlisted. I had some mentors that saw something in me that recommended I start taking college classes, so I did that, and found out I guess I was a late academic bloomer. But as my enlistment ended, I went to college at 20, so a few years older than the typical, I think, college student. But I think having that few years enlisted in the Navy really prepared me in ways to study and to apply myself, where maybe at 17 I wouldn't have been as ready. But it gave me a good foundation. So I went to school in Boston, a place Wentworth Institute, and studied general engineering. I couldn't decide from a young age what I wanted to do, be it civil, mechanical, electrical, and it was a degree that offered a little bit of everything and I guess a whole lot of nothing in terms of employability. But I was going to college with a thought that I was going to go back into the Navy at the time, because I did like the military very much for what it stood for, and that still holds true today. Somewhere along the way, I had a friend that was in the Coast Guard, and he started talking to me about the missions of the Coast Guard, and I got to visit a few Coast Guard units, and I found that the culture, for lack of a better word, the culture of the Coast Guard seemed to resonate better with my personality. And so I applied to Officer Candidate School, and was selected my first time, and that was 32 years ago, and I haven't looked back since.
Wow. Yeah, as you kind of moved through your career path in the journey to the Division 14 or District 14 as the commander, I think what's interesting, we talk about the Navy, and I started in the Navy too, and it was interesting is that there was a separation on the commission side, which was there's line officers and staff officers, and when I started getting really involved with Coast Guard, I started realizing that the CFO, my counterpart, Tom Allen at the time, and then eventually Mark Fedor, I'd go with them socially outside of work, and we'd be talking about, hey, tell me some of the things that you did. And, Admiral Fedor would tell me these stories about him being on the James out of the East Coast. And I eventually went down and met with folks down there. But it was interesting, because here he is the CFO for the U.S. Coast Guard, but he's actually a line officer that's commissioned to ship and captain to ship, and so I think that as those leaders got to the top, they really had an appreciation for the mission support side of the operation and the mission. So I was just kind of curious, as you kind of worked your way through. I know you've had a couple of different roles, but could you just talk about that a little bit as you kind of made your path to District 14?
Sure. Yeah, and I think. We do have specialists vis-a-vis people that are just very focused in one area, but writ large, we're generalists as Coast Guard officers, or line officers, if you will. And I've had a variety of operational tours, from drug enforcement in the Caribbean to at a young age to working on a strike team which does environmental responses to different natural disasters or man-made, maybe the Costco Busan in San Francisco, or the BP Deepwater Horizon spill, until being Sector New York, and interspersed along there were some personnel related. I guess that would be a subspecialty, if you will. So I would say, as you rise in rank, the expectation of Coast Guard officers is that you're able to speak on a wide variety of subjects. As you know, we have 11 statutory missions, and to be just so conversant in one area, I don't know, ice breaking wouldn't do me much good here in Hawaii. But we still need those people that were there. So I think, some of those people we referenced, the Tom Allens, the Mark Fedors, we've all had, the common denominator is an operational background with a subspecialty, if you will. So Mark and Tom's was finance, and they sent them to, great schools. It's a good thing about the Coast Guard. I mean, there's been, I think in my life, I've had a couple of master's degrees. They sent me to Harvard to do a postmaster's fellowship with some of the leading thinkers on national security in the world. And it's that exposure to these different ideas with an operational mindset. So we're able to so the Coast Guard is very small. So we're able to take these larger concepts and I think apply them as best we can to the Coast Guard, which I think that's kind of the secret sauce for our flag corps.
Yeah, what's interesting, you talk about the size of the Coast Guard, about 48,000, 50,000 folks in the Coast Guard, but it's interesting, I would travel with the Commandant or other officers of the Coast Guard for different operations, and the thing that always struck me was, we'd go and take care of business. I remember I was with the Commandant, they had a drug offload in San Diego, met with the with the federal attorneys as they're going through that process. And after business was done, the Commandant would set up some formal meetings in the district, in the sector, to kind of talk through policy issues. And then in the evening, we would go meet with the families of all the leaders. And, it really seemed like, and that wasn't just there. Everywhere we went, there was a part of it where you kind of break bread as a family in the Coast Guard that kind of drew people in. And it wasn't just at the Commandant level. And I thought that that was something that really was a little bit different. In the Navy, they had an ombudsman type process that they would try to set up, and it seemed it was supportive, but in my time is very dated, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the Navy at all, but it was a little bit forced, and it was really for young families that were trying to kind of figure it out. But what's your perspective? Because I sense that here in Hawaii too, same type of operation.
Yeah, no, I think you come in as a single person and you leave as a family. So I think the family dynamic is very important. But it goes back to my earlier comment about the culture. The culture of the Coast Guard, I believe, is one of inclusiveness, and in recognizing that it takes a family to serve. The spouses, they don't take an oath, and the kids don't really have a choice over where they're assigned, but they certainly enable the Coast Guardsmen to serve in a variety of features. So it behooves us as managers, as leaders, to be inclusive of the families, to talk to them, to hear their concerns, and to factor those into decisions we make.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just to switch a little bit, so the name of the show is Ameritocracy. So we really focus on merit, the meritocracy setup. Could you talk a little bit about that merit process, that credentialing, and potentially inside believe in Senate confirmation, which is where we kind of have a little bit of a common ground?
Sure. So it's the Coast Guard employs what we call an up-or-out system, and what that means is of 100 ensigns commissioned, there are a number of promotions along the way, at which there are mandated cuts, if you will. So, for example, to make lieutenant, which is first you come as an ensign, and then you come lieutenant JG, but as a lieutenant when you're first cut. So there's about an 80% selection rate. So of 10 ensigns commissioned, 8 will be retained, 2 will have to leave, and that continues its way up. At lieutenant commander, it's about 70%. So of those 8, you can only retain 70%, and so on. It keeps going up. And by the time you're an Admiral Select, the last statistic I saw was 1.7%. So basically 2 out of 100 ensigns commissioned will make it to be an Admiral. And then at that time, you reference the Senate confirmation. You go through a very extensive questionnaire, and they go looking at everything from stock transactions to social media, it's public information, but there's about an 8-page questionnaire, and they'll go through that, and if they have questions, they'll ask you, they'll bring you into a committee and ask you questions till they're satisfied that you're guess, a worthy candidate to be a flag officer in the United States Coast Guard. And just to back up, there are a number of factors that go into those different promotions. So, as I said, we like a well-rounded person within the Flag Corps. But along the way, if you spent perhaps too much time in one area, that may, you may be enjoying it. Like I love being out in the water, but if that was my sole purpose, I would kind of top out at a certain thing. So that's why I referenced a subspecialty earlier. You almost need a second specialty that you can go back to in a staff tour to continue advancing along the way, because you do have to have familiarity in policy and just how policy is made and how to affect change and move the organization forward. And if you stayed too long in one area, you could just find that you're ineffective in not understanding how the larger organization operates.
Yeah, no, and I think maybe Mike had a little bit of a shielded view, but in Washington, D.C., you could definitely see all the different types of experiences people had, and it made that super valuable there at that level to be able to give kind of a full perspective or ground truth of whatever the situations were. Let's talk a little bit about District 14 in total, maybe the scope of the job, and a little bit of the hierarchy of the organization, just so people get a perspective of how the Coast Guard looks at maybe from the Pacific at the top and then kind of down into the district. So,
sure. I mean, so the visual I would use is think of a sphere and cut it in half, and then on one half is what they call the land side, and the other is the PAC or the Pacific side, and again subdivide that half of a sphere into districts. And there's District 17, which is Alaska, District 13, Seattle, District 11, which is most of California, and then District 14, which is the district I'm currently in command of. And District 14 is actually the largest Coast Guard district in area within the entire Coast Guard. It's about 14.4 square million miles, so roughly 3.5 times the size of the continental United States for a visual. And it goes from Honolulu out to Guam. It includes parts of Singapore, Japan, and then roughly down to Australia, and encompasses all of Oceania region. So quite a large. The number of people isn't staggeringly high because of the population basis, but it's not unusual for a search and rescue case to take 2 or 3 days to get on scene after being notified, because basically by the time you launch a C-130 and fly it, it can be a while. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting the changing role of the Coast Guard is in D.C. and being the finance money guy. You would see the Secretary and the Commandant go to the NSC meetings, and they would come back, and you would hear of taskings that would come down, and the CFO for the Coast Guard and I would kind of sit back and go through that, and I would, without getting into specifics, it seemed that the Coast Guard's role. Yeah, you talked about the 11 statutory missions, everything from law enforcement to waterways, but I also noticed that there was a really important modern future bridge where the Coast Guard is actually able to kind of step in the form of national defense and be able to be effective. I would just be kind of interested because, we're sitting here, we're looking out the window of your office. I look over, I see the Navy over at Pearl Harbor. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Pacific. What's your perspective of the mission or some of the hot points that you look at being in District 14? And kind of keeping everything kind of in check and trying to balance between the 11 missions.
Yeah, I feel like we're at a unique inflection point in terms of the Coast Guard's history, and I really believe we're a unique instrument of national security in that we are operating in the gray zone, and we're one of our former commandants said we're bureaucratically multilingual. Meaning, we can talk about the military and we can also talk to civilians, and there's applicability or services to both entities. Regarding the national security, and here in Oceania in particular, we find ourselves in the crosshairs of the IUUF, which is illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing in helping a lot of our smaller partners and nation states in enforcing their fisheries from predatory practices by other countries.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think a lot of that type of activity, it was interesting. I'll just, again, from a CFO perspective at DHS, we were trying to get money to really help the operational budget across all missions. And I remember going to the White House with, other members of the Coast Guard and the Secretary, and we were talking about this. And somebody took out a map and said, "Hey, you guys are the Coast Guard." Like, they drew a circle around the continental U.S. and the previous commandant, who was just as Admiral Fagan is today as the commandant, really a great spokesperson for the mission without getting confrontational, but started laying out like a bigger picture. And so even within the highest levels of government, sometimes it felt like their mission wasn't fully appreciated. And some of the stuff that you're talking about with fisheries and being able to really kind of patrol, it's a lot different when a white hull ship pulls into a port than a potential Navy ship.
Yeah, I couldn't agree, Troy, with you more, that we are at a unique, as I said, an inflection point in terms of the Coast Guard's history. And I can understand some cognitive dissonance over what is the functionality of the Coast Guard. But I can tell you, as a taxpayer, as a person, you probably don't want a high-end destroyer in Oceania working on fisheries, right? But these, you need only look at the Solomon Islands. They signed a security compact with China, and it's pretty much excluded the U.S. from that area. At least speaking for the Coast Guard, our ships have been unable to refuel there, and we've tried a few times to do that, and that was all out in the open media. So I think as a country, as a nation, we're very interested and invested in keeping a free and open Indo-Pacific. And the Coast Guard is just a unique instrument, as I said, that can do that. We can fill the niche. We can operate in the gray zone, if you will. We're not the high end of conflict. And I guess, as we're reflecting on your comment, I would say we're a lot of things to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. If we were up in the Arctic, we'd be talking ice breaking. Mm-hmm. If we were in the Mississippi, we'd be talking about keeping commerce going down the Mississippi, aids to navigation being important. If we were off of Miami right now, we'd probably be talking about migrant interdiction. And those are just a couple of examples off the top of my head. But it does add, I think, to who is the Coast Guard and what are we? And I guess I'd answer, this has been the answer for a long time, is we're a very multifaceted agency that fills in a lot of the areas where, I don't know that you'd want dedicated, so many dedicated different agencies competing in the same space. We're able to task and retask as necessary. Perfect example, I think the BP oil spill or Deepwater Horizon. Mm-hmm. I was a commanding officer of a strike team, but it wasn't just a strike team that responded. There were buoy tenders, and there were different medical personnel, and just people from all throughout the Coast Guard that swarmed to that event. Mm-hmm. With different backgrounds. And it comes back to, I say the DNA of a Coast Guardsman is someone that wants to help. If we had a bumper sticker, it said, we're there to help. So I don't care if it's search and rescue or responding to an oil spill or helping these foreign nations protect their fisheries, we're there to help. And so these different, Katrina, Maria, these different hurricanes, we're the air crews, we're all single-minded, single-purpose, but we're not so structured that we don't know that we don't have flexibility. We do have organic flexibility. And I think that's one of our strengths. It's why we succeed in so many areas. It comes back to that, hey, we're here to help.
Yeah. Let's pursue a little bit what you were talking about around these career-defining kind of opportunities that happen. Like you said, no one kind of sits back with a forecast that says that these things are going to happen. And one of the most defining events I think that's taken place in many of our lifetimes is what happened in 9/11. And I've talked to a couple of folks on this show about 9/11. For me, I was in Ireland when I just flew in, doing a corporate restructuring in Ireland, and landed. And so everybody remembers where they were at on that day. Your story is very unique, and I would like you to kind of share anybody that has done research on 9/11 and the Coast Guard and kind of that unbelievable activity and heroic activity that took place by the Coast Guard, and you just happened to be the right guy at the right time. Could you explain or talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was stationed in New York on Staten Island. We had our radio towers were on top of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. Made sense. It's a high point with which to talk to ships out to sea and what have you within the port. And as the tower collapsed, we lost all ability to communicate with ships and with our other units. I was sent out to merely relay information. I was supposed to act as a radio bridge, if you will. What was I seeing in Lower Manhattan back to our command center? While there, or heading there, and again, talk about the partnerships that the Coast Guard's good at. I was on actually a pilot boat, which is, they bring ship captains or ships in and out with a maritime pilot boat. Observing, we saw people actually jumping into the waters of the Hudson and East River. So you have to remember, and if you look at any of the visual imagery, the lower half of Manhattan was pretty much cut in half in terms of the dust cloud after both towers had fallen. The bridges and tunnels were closed. That was the last command that FDNY and NYPD had, because they also had their radio antennas were on top of Tower 1, so they lost. Again, the last command was, shut the bridges and tunnels. Mm-hmm. The path, the Port Authority Trans-Hudson was collapsed, and so the evacuation started kind of on its own. There were some small tugboats that were in ferries that were taking people off, and you could just see 10, 20 people deep wanting to get off those boats, right? There was really no other way off of Lower Manhattan. So upon seeing that, made a call on the radio, just as anyone would. I just happened to be there at that moment in time, seeing all available boats, wanting to help with the evacuation of Lower Manhattan, report to Governor's Island, and it comes back to, I reference, the essence of my view of Coast Guardmen is that they're there to help. They want to help, and so started just directing boats to where we saw pockets of people along the waterfront, because they were just all over, and where it made sense to pick people up. Mm-hmm. And as the time went on, there was just an overwhelming response of civilian mariners and tugboats and ferries and various watercraft that wanted to help. And I think, America was attacked that day, and people were looking, for a way to help. And I think when that call came across, here's a manifestation of a means to help others. And so, it kind of grew exponentially as more and more vessels came. And we just, I probably didn't do the best job initially, and there was a chief petty officer that I always give credit to that kind of helped simplify the situation and running routes back and forth. But it was best estimate at the end of 8.5, 9 hours is over 500,000 people. I forget, wow. One of the universities did a study. We weren't counting the numbers. I was as shocked as anyone when a couple weeks later when they came out with that estimate. So I've seen 300, I've seen 700. Right. I don't know. I think the media has kind of settled on the 500,000. So that's the number we'll go with. It's pretty good no matter what. And the interesting thing for me is, as time has gone on, and there was a documentary with Tom Hanks called 9/11 Boat Lift that talked about how many people have come up to me over the years that have said they were rescued on that day, and how appreciative they were of it. And I always try to give credit to the mariners that responded just based on a call for help.
Yeah, it's incredible. When you look at 500,000 people just trying to get off. I was outside the country and we were stranded. You couldn't get back to the U.S. So everybody kind of had their way of kind of being cordoned off. But what's interesting is that I remember being in Ireland and you would hear stories coming up of heroic things that happened. And to this day, I still remember hearing about the story. And, it's just fascinating to me to be able to kind of, really have the opportunity to talk to you about that. But, I think the other part too in branding the Coast Guard is, like you said, that perspective that they're there, they fill the void, and, they're always ready to help, that semper paratus mindset. We kind of go through a little bit, being here in Honolulu, and have an opportunity to meet with the mayor, and, from my perspective, as you know, being a mayor of a small city, and having that interaction with the federal government or the National Guard, it was always interesting. In California, we always had a lot of issues going on with BRAC, potential BRAC closures, and really kind of maintain a relationship with the community and the base. Here in Hawaii, there's such military presence, especially here, and I was just kind of curious from your perspective of the relationship between the Coast Guard and the community, and kind of how do you cordon that off as somebody that's got such a significant responsibility, but you're always trying to be a good neighbor?
Yeah, so I would say, Troy, we're your local federal agency, and by that I mean we are small, and community relations are important, and I think it's easier in many ways for us to have good relations because we are smaller, we are more accessible. I just my opinion, I think sometimes when you have a super large population, it's hard to get a grasp of who are they. I think you look at some of our Coast Guard stations, you may have 25 people in a small community, 25 Coast Guardsmen in a small community, and it's easy for them to integrate and know who they are and what they stand for. And at the end of the day, these young men and women are going out sometimes in the night in the middle of a storm to save people's loved ones, right? And that's a great story that and we love telling that story. And but how can you not feel something again for these young? I see them all the time, 18, 21-year-olds, and they're taking a small boat out, sometimes in perilous conditions, to rescue a family of four on a sailboat that something happened, and they're putting their lives in danger to save someone that they don't know. They don't know who they are. All they know is their job as Coast Guardsmen is to go out there and help someone. And that happens time and again, be it our helicopter crews, dropping a rescue swimmer into the raging surf. And it's not always a tumultuous sea. Sometimes it's a medical emergency. Thing of it is, comes back to we're there to help, and I think people see that, and it goes back to one of the first questions you asked. The culture of the Coast Guard is there to help others, and I think that resonates well. And it's and it comes back to the branding, right? That's a little bit of the home game branding as a way to the the away game, but if you will, but definitely a role. I mean, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say we've got people over in Fifth Fleet over there in Bahrain right now that are regularly encountering boats from Iran and different areas, and they're standing guard out there away from home, away from their families, all with a purpose of protecting American interests.
Yeah, you and I had talked before we got on mic, and when I was stationed here in in the 80s, the Coast Guard had a brand that was probably more user friendly at the retail level because a lot of people here are into water, getting out on the waters, either sailboat, surfing, and so the search and rescue would be a big thing. I would think too, with volcanoes, you guys potentially could see activity of getting involved to be kind of the support, and just kind of finishing off on the community is that I think that. I know in, let's say, San Diego or Miami or Key West, the relationship was probably bordering on the big law enforcement coordination that would happen between the different components of DHS, CBP, and ICE. Here, do they have as much interaction in the law enforcement mission, and is there a lot of interagency or intergovernmental or inter-DHS type activity here?
Yeah, there is and there isn't. So, like the drug trades are just different here.
Yeah.
We don't see the same trends due to the distances from
Yep.
South America. We do routinely meet both inter-DHS and intergovernmental. It depends on the issue, but we're a willing partner. So you mentioned the volcano. We were bringing NOAA and other scientists out there. Just I think it was 2 weeks ago. We again for NOAA, we transported some monk seals to another island to be. We were able to combine a training flight with routine operations to the benefit of that protected resource. I think somewhere I read there's only like 1,400 of these monk seals alive, so it's a long way of saying we partner, I think, very well, and I have the flexibility, the adaptability, the agility to do these assorted missions that I think help build goodwill and they help our living marine resources along the way.
Yeah, and then Admiral Dave, when you just kind of look in total and looking to trying to get the perspective to the listeners of maybe some lessons learned, any advice that you would be able to provide someone to help them prepare themselves when they get into a situation to successfully perform in those career-defining moments, say, whether that is a moment that you actually think you've planned for, or all of a sudden you take an inventory after the effect and you're like, hey, you know what, this certain things that I've done that actually didn't seem like it made a lot of sense at the time really got me ready. Anything you'd pass on?
Yeah, so I think, so I want to believe any Coast Guard would have done the same thing in the same position. But I think the takeaway I had is setting the environment that enables those, that on-scene initiative and that bias for action to take hold. If I was part of a bureaucratic organization where I thought I would have had to get permission, if you will, to do that evacuation, maybe it wouldn't have happened, or maybe it wouldn't have been as successful. But on the contrary, the person I work for set an environment where I felt empowered to make decisions for the good of the people, and I try to adapt that myself. I want people to feel empowered to make decisions and that are for the best of the organization and for the people we serve. To go back to that that helicopter offshore that's dangling a rescue swimmer to pick up someone. I can't be on the other end of the radio telling them what to do. They have to have that on-scene initiative to decide, am I going to lower that swimmer into the water, or the sea's too rough? What can I do? And it's just an example of setting the conditions, of setting the environment, of empowering people. One of my sayings is I'm always preaching innovation and adaptability, and encouraging people to leapfrog over. Don't just take what I do and improve it incrementally. That's not leadership or innovation. Innovation is taking what I did or someone's did and leapfrogging over them, and then making a change for the right direction. And to foster that, I tell them, any failure is mine, any success is yours, and I will own failure on anything that is done in the spirit of improving services to the people. And again, there's a trust factor too, though, right? Like I trust that what they're doing is reasoned and well thought out. But regardless, if you come to me and say, we tried this and it didn't work, that's fine. I own that failure. I will accept that and brief it up appropriately. But if it works, good on you. You had a great idea. And I think that environment, and that's nothing new to me or unique to me. I've worked for many people along the way, and I think that's a common refrain, and that's how we move forward. We obviously we have guardrails, right? It can't be illegal or unethical or immoral, but but those are pretty broad barriers, if you will, or guardrails. And I think that setting that environment enabled me to succeed back on 9/11, and I still try to emulate that environment in my leadership when I'm working with people.
Yeah. Well, Admiral Day, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you here, and I think that the opportunity to be able to educate people about the Coast Guard, the great opportunities here. I have young, my boys. At least two of them are within the time age limit that they could potentially do something, and I know when you talk with a lot of kids that see the potential careers in the Coast Guard and the opportunity, it's and they hear these stories and the empowerment. It seems like that is the right opportunity where people can really put initiative and have that leadership and an organization that supports them through. So I just wanted to thank you again for having me here. And anything else you'd like to say before we?
Troy, no, I just thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I would say to any of your listeners that do have younger people considering the service, a couple things I've noticed is we tend to get a lot of prior service people from the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, you name it. They tend to come to the Coast Guard on their second or third enlistment, and we welcome that. And I do think it's a unique organization that it really does help people with their leadership skills, because we don't have a lot of bureaucracy, so we're counting on you to be leaders and to seize the initiative and basically to do great things. That's another bumper sticker. I'd say you will have the opportunity to do great things in the Coast Guard, and we invite anyone and everyone to join. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you again, and I wish you the very best. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.